Check, check. Hello, everybody. Welcome. We are about 8 minutes out from getting started. If those of you in the back, it'll be a good experience. If y'all want to move up and fill in some for Dr. Turek, you'll have chances to ask questions at the end. So as you're coming in, or if you're way in the back, you can fill in some. I think you'll enjoy it more. We'll get started in about 6 or 7 minutes. Good evening. So glad that you are here. Listen, look around for a minute, lock eyes with one or two people and tell them, say, we're the hungry people. You showed back up. You get the gold star on Sunday. Hey, listen, God's going to bless and honor our time tonight, but here's how I know. God honors and fills buckets that are turned right side up where they're ready to be filled. So are you ready to be filled? I know you are. Thank you for coming tonight. Thanks for coming hungry. Whether you are a believer and you want to walk with others and you want to deepen your faith and own your faith at a different level, whether you're you're skeptical of Jesus and you don't know what you believe, or you would say, I don't believe anything about God. I believe there's not a God. This is a great place to be tonight. I want to welcome you personally. My name's Kevin Rivers, pastor here at Midway Church. We're honored to have you, those of you who are guests with us. I know we got a CCF crew from the college campus here. We're so thankful for you guys, thankful for all of you showing up. Dr. Turek did an outstanding job this morning in our services. If you missed those, you can go to our YouTube page, Facebook, all the places we stream and find any of those anytime. We want to welcome you to do that. You're going to get a recap tonight, and he's going to keep it rolling. But you didn't come to listen to me, did you? So I'm going to pray for us, and I'm going to hand it right over to Dr. Frank Turek. You're about to be blessed. Let's pray together. Father, thank you for just a glorious Sunday. You're good to us. And Lord, as we have come through these series of messages, God, our prayer has been that it wouldn't just be a series of 10 weeks of sermons and messages, but that as we go through deconstructing doubt, that people could wrestle with their doubts and allow you to meet them in those moments, in those wrestles, in the tension points that they feel. And then, Lord, these last 4 weeks, as we've looked at a reasonable faith, we try to rationalize things and understand things with a human finite mind, things that are so far above us and bigger than us. Lord, we thank you that you meet us in that as well as we confront hard questions. And as Dr. Turek leads us in a time now to do just that, help us, God, to have open hands. Open hands are such that say, God, here is me. They're generous and they say, I offer me. I make myself vulnerable. But they also are open to say, God, fill me up. God, I'm ready to receive. So God, we sit here with open hands tonight saying, speak to our hearts, even in our doubts and our questions, our confusion. And God, I know you're going to do amazing things. We thank you. We ask it all in Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen. Y'all give a great welcome to Dr. Frank Turek.
Thanks, Kev. Ladies and gentlemen, how many people were here this morning or were somewhere else at the time? All right, how many of you are here right now? How many don't respond to surveys? That's what we need to know. All right, how many were not here this morning, didn't see part one? Where were you heathens? Come on. All right, what I'm gonna do is just review what we did this morning very briefly. We started out by talking about Petty Officer Michael Monsoor, United States Navy SEAL, who on September 29, 2006, literally sacrificed himself to save his two colleagues. And he was later given the Medal of Honor posthumously by President George W. Bush. He has a ship named after him because he is a hero. He gave up his life for his friends. And we said that there's no greater love than to give up your life to save your friends. And we said that Michael Monsoor sacrificed himself to save his friends. Would anyone sacrifice himself to save you? And we said someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. But in today's culture, a lot of people don't think the story's true. They think it's invented. It's written down by religious people. We know religious people tend to embellish things. And it's got miracles in it, like a resurrection. And I asked this morning if anyone's seen a resurrection, and nobody said yes. So how rational is it to be a Christian to believe something none of us have ever seen? And then we said, well, it's actually easy to show that Christianity's true. You only need to answer 4 questions, and these are the 4 questions. Does truth exist? Does God exist? Are miracles possible? And is the New Testament telling us the truth about the resurrection? Because if the resurrection really did occur, ladies and gentlemen, then game over, Christianity's true. If it didn't occur, it's false. As the Apostle Paul himself said to the church at Corinth, if Christ hasn't risen from the dead, your faith is in vain. And so this morning we covered the first question, does truth exist? And as we said, whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Now don't blow this like you did this morning. All right, in fact, let me refresh you how he actually said it. Here it is.
I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
All right, let's try it. I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
All right, very good. Much better than this morning. And we said that there's a law of logic that most of us know, but we've forgotten we've known because we've never had a course in logic. I actually partially learned logic from one of my seminary professors, the great Richard G. Howe, who's sitting right here, ladies and gentlemen. Stand up, Richard. He lives in Cumming, and he teaches at Southern Evangelical Seminary, where I went, ses.edu/Frank, and get the pillow too, okay? Yeah, you can actually get a scholarship by going to ses.edu/Frank if you want to learn about apologetics. Now, somebody else near and dear to my heart is my son, who is a Lieutenant Colonel Select in the Air Force, and he's sitting right next to Richard. There he is right there. Stand up, Zach. He is also the co-author of Hollywood Heroes, the real brains behind the movie, the book that we have out there that I'll tell you about later. And so Zach is also a graduate of Southern Evangelical Seminary, ses.edu. Did I mention that? All right, /Frank. In any event, we talked about the laws of logic, and the laws of logic, many of us know these laws, but we forgot we've known them. And the one law we kept talking about this morning was the law of non-contradiction, that opposite ideas cannot both be true at the same time and in the same sense. And so we said when somebody says something like there is no truth, you're going to ask that person a question. What's the question going to be? Is that true, right? It's self-defeating to say there's no truth. It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. And we said that there is a thinking skill you got to get good at using, and that is to turn the claim on itself. Turn the claim on itself. So when someone says there's no truth, you turn the claim on itself and you simply ask, is that true? And we did this with several other slogans that we hear in our culture, slogans like there is no absolute truth, or it's true for you but not for me, or you ought not judge. All of these statements are actually self-defeating. And we summed it up this way. We said, can everyone see that this statement right here shoots itself? And we said that relativism and postmodernism are false because they claim it's true that there is no truth. And that's where we ended this morning. We said truth does exist, but the next question, is it true that God exists? All right, so this is new material. You guys ready to go? All right, this morning I mentioned there are three arguments we're going to look at to show that God exists. There are more than three, but we're just going to look at three. And the first argument we're going to look at is something called the cosmological argument. It comes from the beginning of the universe. Cosmological just comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. And it says if the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. Telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose. And it says if there's design in the universe and design in you, life, then there must be a designer. Now, these first two arguments have some scientific evidence behind them. We'll see some of that here in a few minutes. The third argument doesn't have any science behind it. It's more philosophical in nature, yet it's the argument you've all intuitively understood since you were a very small child. It's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in a Holocaust, or it's wrong to cross a border and rape and mutilate children, then God must exist. Because if there is no God, a standard of righteousness beyond us that we're obligated to obey, then everything's just a matter of opinion. It's just your opinion against a baby torturer's opinion, or your opinion against Hitler's opinion, or your opinion against some jihad terrorist of Hamas. Well, we know these aren't just opinions. If that's the case, there must be a standard beyond us that we're obligated to obey. And that standard can only exist if God exists. Now, we'll get to that argument later, but we got to start with the first argument, the cosmological argument. Now, you got to admit, it was worth coming here tonight just to see God do that. I know some of you have said, I've never seen God move. Oh, really? Check this out. Look at that. Now, this is the argument that many say points back to the Big I know there's some Christians in here going, Frank, we're Christians and we don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is so good that even atheistic physicists like Stephen Hawking, who was probably the top physicist in the world until he died about 6 years ago, even he admits the universe had a beginning. Here's what he said. Almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, for those of you that don't know, Hawking was sort of a medical miracle because he had ALS early on in his life, and normally that'll kill you in a couple of years. He lived for decades with ALS. Now, Hawking, being an atheist, admitted the universe had a beginning, but he didn't really have any good explanation. In fact, in the last book he wrote, The Grand Design, here's what his explanation for the beginning of the universe was. This is from page 180. He says this, literally, this is a quote. Because there's a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. Hello, McFly. Create yourself out of what? In fact, John Lennox, the esteemed philosopher and mathematician from Oxford University, in commenting on what Hawking said this: when brilliant scientists say nonsense, it's still nonsense. Now, agnostic cosmologists say the same thing. This guy's Alexander Vilenkin, and he came up with a theorem in 2003 which showed that our universe had to have a beginning, and here's how he put it in his book. He said, with the proof now in place, cosmologists, by the way, a cosmologist is not someone that puts on your makeup, all right? A cosmologist studies the universe. Cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Now, Vilenkin uses a couple of very interesting words in this quote. The first is the word proof. Unusual for scientists to use the word proof because by definition, science is tentative. Old scientific theories are often overpowered by new evidence. But Vilenkin sees so much evidence pointing to a beginning, he's willing to call it a proof. The other interesting word is the word problem. Why is it a problem that there was a cosmic beginning? Because if space, time, and matter had a beginning out of nothing, what could have caused that? Not something inside of space, time, and matter. In other words, not something natural, because nature itself had a beginning. It would seem only a cause outside of nature could have caused this. We'll get to that in a minute, but he called it a problem because many scientists are naturalists. They don't think there's a supernatural realm. Now, we're not going to look at the evidence for this. Why? Number one, we don't have time. Number two, it's all in the book, chapter 3. And number 3, it's not even controversial. Even the atheists are admitting the universe had a beginning. What is controversial is what caused the universe to have a beginning. We'll get into that in a minute. I do want to show you a piece of evidence from philosophy that is immune to any scientific discovery. I think this argument here is never going to change. I think it just makes rational sense. And to show it to you, consider this timeline. There's today, there's yesterday, there's the day before yesterday, there's last week, right? When tomorrow comes, we're going to add another day to this timeline, but we're not there yet. There's today. Here's my question. Can this timeline be infinite into the past? No, why not? Because you would never get to today. A homeschooling mom had it right here, right? Yes. Because look, if there were an infinite number of days before today, this day that we're in never would have gotten here. Why? Because you'd always have to live another day before you got to today if there's an infinite number of days before today. Some of you are looking at me like you have intellectual constipation. I know. It's kind of hard to get your mind around this, but there can't be an infinite number of days before today. There can only be a finite number, a limited number, if today is going to get here. If that's the case, time had a beginning. And what created time? Only something timeless. And by the way, if you're timeless, do you have a beginning? No. Therefore, do you have a cause? No. This answers the who made God question. If our cause is God, people are going to say, who made God? No one made God. He's the uncaused first cause. There has to be an uncaused first cause. This is called the Kalam cosmological argument. But let's just jump to the bottom line now. And it's this. Look, oh, by the way, if the past were infinite today, never would have arrived, as I just mentioned. If the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. The evidence leaves us with one of the following two options. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, here's my only question. Which view is more reasonable? That no one created something out of nothing, or someone created something out of nothing? What do you think? Number two, someone. I was at Texas A&M once, and one atheist said, I think number one is more reasonable. I said, number one? Let's look at number two for a second. Number two says, someone created something out of nothing. Now, that's a miracle, right? But at least you got a miracle worker. You got someone. Number one is a miracle with no miracle worker. That's clearly absurd. In fact, I said to the audience at Texas A&M that night, I said, to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality, that everything that comes to be has a cause. There is nobody sitting in this auditorium tonight who is currently sitting here. You are not worried that a hippopotamus has appeared out of nothing by nothing in your dorm room and is currently pooping on your pillow, right? You're not worried about that. Why? Because you know that things don't pop into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause. And if the whole universe could do so, as some atheists say, why doesn't everything pop into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause? Why don't Teslas pop into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause? Why don't MacBook Pros do so? Could have saved me like $3,000. If you're hungry after this seminar and you want to have a pizza, does it make sense to order one? Or should you just sit in your kitchen, wait, and hope one pops into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause? No, it seems to me the atheists have all the faith. By the way, do you realize that everyone believes in at least one miracle? I mean, Christians believe in this miracle and several others, but atheists believe in at least one miracle. They believe that no one created something out of nothing. Now, if you want to take blind faith, who has more blind faith, the Christian or the atheist? It's the atheists that have more blind faith. In fact, here's a question that was asked many years ago by a German philosopher by the name of Leibniz, who said this: if there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? In other words, if there is no God, why does anything exist? Why does the universe exist? Why do I exist? Why do you exist? Why do the Dallas Cowboys exist? That's clear evidence that Satan is alive and well, all right? No, think about it. Why does anything exist if there is no God? There has to be an uncaused first cause. Now think about this, ladies and gentlemen. If space, time, and matter had a beginning out of nothing, which is what the evidence shows, whatever created space, time, and matter must transcend space, time, and matter. In other words, the cause must be outside of space, time, and matter. So the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create. Why personal? You say, well, to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons make choices. Also, the cause would have to be intelligent to have a mind to make a choice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? You say, God. Yeah, but how do you know it's the Christian God, Frank? We don't yet. We haven't done enough research yet. I mean, this could be Allah at this point, or some other theistic or deistic God. But if we keep going through the evidence and we discover that Jesus really rose from the dead, then we can say that the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,991 years ago is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. Now, we haven't gotten there yet, but we have 6 attributes from one argument that could be the God of the Bible. All right, now, let's go to the next argument. And we'll spend more time on this, the teleological argument. In fact, prominent atheists have said this is probably the most difficult one to deal with. There are 2 aspects to this argument. One is the universe appears to be designed, and second, life appears to be designed. You appear to be designed. Let's look at the universe first. Scientists have discovered in recent decades that the universe is fine-tuned to support life. That if you were to change any one of a number of factors about our universe virtually imperceptibly, either the universe wouldn't exist, or if it did, it couldn't support life. And even atheists agree with this. Again, Stephen Hawking put it this way. He said, if the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million, a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. If the expansion rate was that infinitesimally different at the very beginning, none of us would be here. You say, well, maybe it just evolved to that rate by chance. Ladies and gentlemen, it didn't evolve to anything. It started at the right rate. It seems to me that the same being that created space-time and matter is the same being that also fine-tuned the expansion rate to be precisely what it needed to be. Also, the gravitational force, if it were altered by more than 1 part in 10 to the 40th power, we wouldn't exist compared to the strong nuclear force. What's 1 part in 10 to the 40th power? That's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. I know, neither can I, so let me give you an illustration. Take the entire North American continent from Central America all the way to Greenland and stack it in dimes all the way to the moon. That's 238,000 miles. Then do that on 1 billion other North American continents. Take all those piles of dimes, put them in one humongous pile, mark 1 dime red, mix it in, blindfold a friend, throw him on that pile, and ask him to pick 1 dime at random. The chances he would pick that 1 marked red dime is 1 chance in 10 to the 40th power. Is he gonna pick that 1 red dime? No. There's virtually 0 chance he will. Look, there's only 2 possibilities for that value being where it is. Either it was designed to be there or it wasn't. What makes more sense? Design. You say, what about chance? Ladies and gentlemen, is chance a cause? Does chance cause things? Who caused this? Chance, he was just here. No. Chance is not a cause. Chance is a word we use to describe mathematical possibilities. Chance doesn't do anything. In fact, when scientists use the word chance, you know what they really mean? We don't know, all right? This appears to be designed. You have to have a lot of blind faith to say otherwise. And these are just a couple of at least a dozen of these parameters about our universe. There's probably over 100 parameters about our solar system that are designed. In fact, let's take a look at the solar system here for just a second. Here we are, third rock from the sun. If we were just a little bit closer to or a little bit further away, we couldn't survive. A little bit closer to, we'd burn up. A little bit further away, we'd freeze. We are what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it is, that's a lie, it's way too hot here in the summer. The axial tilt, 23.5 degrees, change that slightly, we don't exist. Earth rotation, 24 hours, change that slightly, we don't exist. The size and distance of the moon from us, change that slightly, we don't exist. If Jupiter was not in its current orbit, we couldn't exist here on Earth. Why? What does Jupiter do for us? Yeah, Jupiter's gravitational force is so strong that it attracts most of the meteors and space junk to it rather than us. It's a cosmic vacuum cleaner. In fact, if you take a close-up look at Jupiter, you know what those dark marks are? Those dark marks are comet fragment strikes that are bigger than the Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. Because if Jupiter wasn't there, we wouldn't be here. Saturn does the same thing for us. In fact, you want to see the planets by size? Here they are. There's Saturn, the Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Earth. Look at poor Pluto down here. You know, Pluto recently has been demoted as a planet. I don't know about you, but I think it's size discrimination. And what if Pluto identifies as a planet? What then? You bigots. Take a look at this. You can hardly see Pluto. Take a look at this. That's Arcturus, another star in our galaxy. Here's the sun. Jupiter is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Earth is invisible. Pluto, forget about it. All right, keep an eye on Arcturus now. Where's Arcturus now? See it way over here? Right of Regal. That's Antares, another star in our galaxy. The sun is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Jupiter is invisible. Earth, Pluto, forget about them. In fact, if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse here. Look, I don't name the stars, all right? If the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse would be 5 or 6 Empire State Buildings high. The heavens are awesome. And that's just in our galaxy. And the average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles, and all that distance is necessary for us to exist here on Earth. Now, 30 trillion miles, how far is that? Far. It'll take you at least 2 tanks of gas in a Toyota Prius to go 30 trillion miles. Now, a number of years ago, my wife and I and our 3 sons went to the Desert Museum in Tucson, Arizona, because my in-laws lived out there. And if you've ever been to the Desert Museum in Tucson on the south side of the town, over the little mountain range, if you go out there at night and it's a clear night, you can see thousands of stars in the sky. So we're out there one night and the guide said, wow, it's so clear tonight that if we look up at 9:03, we'll see the space shuttle in orbit. Remember the space shuttle? We used to have one of those. And I said, oh, come on, we're not gonna see the space shuttle. It's only 120 feet long. It's 350 miles up. We're not gonna see it. Oh, me of little faith. At 9:03, the guide goes, look! And we look up in the sky, about 70 degrees above the horizon, there's an object streaking across the western desert sky relative to us about like this. I mean, it's really cooking. When it got right about here, it disappeared. I don't know whether Scotty beamed it up or what. Actually, what happened was, despite the fact that we were in total darkness, the space shuttle was so high up, the sun was still reflecting off of it. And then when it got out of the range of the sun, we couldn't see it anymore. Now, when the space shuttle was in orbit, the space shuttle was traveling at about 18,000 miles an hour. That's 5 miles per second. You got trouble getting to work in the morning? Take the space shuttle. 5 miles a second. You'll be in Atlanta in like 5 seconds. Well, I did a little calculation to try and figure out how long would it take us if we could get in the space shuttle and go from our star, the sun, to another star an average distance away inside our galaxy, 30 trillion miles. In other words, how long would it take us to go 30 trillion miles if we could go 5 miles per second? How long do you think it would take us? A long time. You must be a math major. Yeah. It would take us 201,450 years. That means if you got in the space shuttle at the time of Christ and started traveling from our star, the sun, to another star an average distance away inside our galaxy, you've been going 5 miles a second for 2,000 years. You would be less than 1/100th of the way there right now. And we're going to explore space. No, we're not. We're not going anywhere in space. It took us 9 years to get to Pluto. I mean, do you realize that if our solar system was the size of a quarter with the sun in the middle and Pluto on the outer rim, you know the next nearest star is? It's over 2 football fields away. The heavens are awesome. Even if we were to go light speed, 186,000 miles an hour, a second, 186,000 miles per second, it would take us almost 4 years to get to the next nearest star. We're never gonna get to another planetary system. It's too far and it's too dangerous. But imagine if we did figure out light speed. Imagine if we did get to another planetary system. In fact, what I'm about to show you now is a little bit disturbing, but I think you can handle it. Imagine we get to another planetary system, we plant our flag, and then this happens. Beans are not for astronauts, ladies and gentlemen. To show you how analytical my wife is, I showed her that video and she smiled just a little bit and then she said, that's illogical. There's no sound in space. Now notice what the psalmist says about the love of God compared to the universe. Psalm 103, for as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. Well, how high are the heavens above the earth? We've already seen in our galaxy, it's almost unbelievable. Well, the Hubble Space Telescope helped us discover how big the entire universe is. In 2003, they trained Hubble on 1/26 millionth of the sky. What's 1/26 millionth of the sky? Go outside tonight, put a piece of rice on the end of your finger, hold it up. That piece of rice represents about 1/26 millionth of the sky. So for about 11 days of exposure time, Hubble analyzed this. This is called Hubble Ultra Deep Field. You can Google this. What I'm about to show you is in the public domain. In fact, I'm about to show you what they found. I don't know if you can see the bottom of this here. These are mountains right here. This is the southern hemisphere. I'm gonna show you the video they put together. It's gonna, when I show it, you'll see the constellations come up, and then Hubble's gonna go zoom out to that 1/26 millionth of the sky. There's no audio, it's just video. You guys ready? All right, here it is, Hubble Ultra Deep Field. There are the constellations. Now let's go see what they found. What you're looking at are nearly 10,000 galaxies in 1/26 millionth of the sky, each with billions of stars of their own. And how many stars are there in the entire universe? The number of stars in the entire universe are about equivalent to the number of grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth times 100,000. And to go from just one star to another star inside our galaxy going 5 miles a second will take you over 200,000 years. Now you know what the Bible means when it says the heavens declare the glory of God. Now, ladies and gentlemen of Midway Church, I never, ever want to hear you ever use the word awesome again unless you're talking about the heavens or God. Awesome shirt, dude. Awesome shot, dude. Awesome TikTok. No! What are you going to say for God if you're throwing awesome around on stuff that ain't awesome? Now, if this is supposed to communicate to us through the physical creation about God's immaterial qualities, we're in big trouble. Why? Because if this is trying to communicate infinity to us, that means every attribute of God is infinite, including his justice. Well, if God is infinitely just, we're all in trouble. Because if he's infinitely just, he has to punish us. And all of us have been unjust. So what's the solution? I only showed you the first half of the verse a minute ago. Here's the second half of Psalm 103. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us. Well, how has he done that? How can he remain just and allow unjust people to go unpunished? He has to find an innocent substitute who he can punish in our place. Where is he going to find it in any one of us? He can't. We're all guilty. So he adds humanity to his deity. He comes to earth, allows the creatures that rebelled against him to torture and kill him so he could take our punishment upon himself. That way he remains just, and he's also the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. This is why Jesus is the only way. What I just said there is from Romans 3:26. It's not arbitrary when Jesus says, I'm the only way. Literally, there's no other way an infinitely just being can allow unjust creatures to go unpunished unless he punishes an innocent substitute. That way he remains just and justifies sinners. That's why Jesus is the only way. Now, when you look at a universe that has stars equivalent to sand grains on 100,000 Earths, and it's going to take you over 200,000 years at 5 miles a second just to go between two of those stars, does that make you feel insignificant? It shouldn't. Why? Because as amazing as the heavens are, they're not made in the image of God, but you are. In fact, the heavens were made for you. And this is the second aspect of the design argument. Not only are the heavens designed, but you're designed. This is you in the womb at 11 weeks. Question, is this animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? In fact, let's go back even further than 11 weeks. Let's go back to when your mother and your father got together to conceive you. Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. I also see some older people in here, so I'll try and be discreet as well, just in case you've forgotten how this works. When your mother and your father got together to conceive you, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg to attract your father, and then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race, and you won. Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. You beat out 300 million others. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. Now, seeing some of you limping here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool, but you were. Now, your soldier was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt, yet it contained half of the 3.2 billion letter genome, your software program, your DNA, all the letters in the right order, and your mother's egg was about the size of a period at the end of a sentence in an average book, and it contained the other half of the 3.2 billion letter genome, your software program, all the letters in the right order. And when your soldier and your egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. You know, you have not received any more genetic information from this point till right now. Your genetic information has just duplicated itself. In fact, there were only 4 things separating you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separate a 2-year-old from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah, it does. We don't kill the 2-year-old. Why do we kill the unborn child in the womb? Genetically, it's the same. You say, Frank, come on, you can't legislate morality. All right, no extra charge for this. This was the subject of our first book, creatively titled Legislating Morality. All laws legislate morality. All laws declare one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. You can't think of a law that doesn't legislate morality. The only question is whose morality will be legislated. And when people say, well, don't impose your morality on me, I say, why not? Would that be immoral? Because you're imposing your morality on me right now. You're saying I ought not impose ought nots. Well, why do you get to impose ought nots, but I don't? Actually, the better answer is this. When somebody says, don't impose your morality on me, I think you ought to say, this isn't my morality. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that abortion's wrong, that mutilating children is wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men, and the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society is to legally recognize that man-woman relationship over every other relationship. I didn't make any of this stuff up. This isn't my morality. This isn't your morality. This just happens to be the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. The one the Apostle Paul said, the Gentiles are not of the law written on their hearts, as he says in Romans chapter 2. Look, if you have a problem with demorality, you don't have a problem with me. I didn't make it up. You have a problem with the Creator upon whose nature this morality is derived. All right, no extra charge for that. Let's go back to this. From this point till right now, a construction project of astonishing complexity began taking place. Cells began multiplying in you at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second. For most of you anyway. Some cells became brain cells, others heart cells, others lung cells. How did they know how to do this? Nobody knows. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this very moment. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4. Knock it off. I mean, are you thinking about this? Are you going, wait a minute, Frank, I got to concentrate. New red blood cells coming up. No, this is just happening. How is it happening? Aristotle noticed something about 2,400 years ago. Of course, he didn't know anything about blood cells, but he did notice that all of nature's going in a direction. And if it's going in a direction, there must be somebody directing it. For example, have you ever noticed that an acorn, if it's properly nourished, always goes in the direction of becoming an oak tree? Why doesn't it become an elm tree or a birch tree or a seahorse? Well, it's programmed to become an oak tree. Well, who programmed it? And by the way, is an acorn conscious? Is an acorn in the ground going, all right, what do I have to do to become an oak tree? No. But it reliably goes in the direction of becoming an oak tree. If it doesn't have a mind of its own, there must be an external mind directing it toward an end. That's what Aristotle called the unmoved mover. Thomas Aquinas came along in the 1200s AD and said, this is going to be my fifth way to argue for God, that all of nature's going in a direction, so there must be an active intellect directing it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a Big Bang cause way back when. Many atheists think, oh, we've answered Aquinas and Aristotle. No, they haven't. This is not an historical cause. This is a cause right now. Every single second the universe exists, it's being directed by whom? You ever wonder why the natural laws are so orderly? Why things happen with reliable cause and effect? Why everything is so consistent? Because there's a mind behind all this. This is why we can do science. A lot of people say, oh, if you got science, you don't need God. Nonsense. Science needs God. There's no other way to have an orderly universe unless there's an orderer keeping it going. This is why we can detect reliable cause and effect. If everything was random, you couldn't do that. In other words, God is to the universe what a band is to music. If a band were up here playing music, the band would be creating and sustaining the music, right? What would happen to the music the second the band stopped playing? Music's over. God does the same thing. God creates the universe. He creates the natural laws that govern it. He creates you, and he sustains the universe, the natural laws that govern it, and he sustains you. Every single second the universe exists. If God were to pull his hand his way, we'd go out of existence. This is why the Apostle Paul could say, in him we live and move and have our being. And Christ holds all things together. And the writer of Hebrews says God sustains all things by his powerful word. See, we only think God does two things. Oh, maybe he created the universe and every once in a while he intervenes. No, he does three. He creates the universe, he sustains it all, and he intervenes at certain points, which we'll see here in a few minutes. By the way, we have a quote, and I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, from a biologist who says this. He says, God never did a miracle to convince an atheist because his ordinary works provide sufficient evidence. Just look around, how the universe works. Why is there a universe at all? Because there's a cause behind it, an historical cause and a present cause. Now, we got to move on to our third argument for God. There's much more in the books on that, but we got to move on to the moral argument. And probably the easiest way to communicate the moral argument is to talk about football. Football. Here's how. Ladies and gentlemen, how do you know that your quarterback throwing a touchdown is better than your quarterback throwing a pick six? That's when he throws it to the other team and they take it back for a touchdown. How do you know that? This is the interactive portion of the program. How do you know that a touchdown for your team is better than a touchdown for their team? How do you know that? Not just points, not just the rules. There has to be a purpose to the game. If there's no purpose to the game, you can't say that this play gets us closer to the purpose and this play takes us further away. All you can do is say the plays are different. But if you know the purpose is to win the game and score more points than the other team, then you know that a touchdown is better than a pick six. If there's no purpose, you can't say one play is better than another. Now notice in football, the purpose of the game comes from outside the game. When the Chiefs and the 49ers played in the Super Bowl a few months ago, they showed up on the field. They didn't set the purpose up. They didn't set the rules up. Who set that all up? Well, the commissioner and the competition committee. And every once in a while, like in the offseason, they get together and tweak the rules. Why? They can. Because the game is arbitrary, right? They can make the rules differently. In fact, they just changed the rules. I don't know if you heard recently, but next year you can't tackle anyone. I don't know if you heard that, but there's no more tackling in the NFL, okay? They can do that. It's arbitrary. But the rules come from outside the game. So does the purpose. Well, the same thing is true in life. The purpose of life comes from outside the game, comes from outside of life. And so do the rules. Although the rules don't change, the values behind the rules don't change because they come from the Creator himself, his nature. If there is no purpose, if there is no God, then there's no right way to live it and no wrong way to live it. Everything's just a matter of opinion. In fact, if there is no God, then you can't say the Nazis were wrong. I had a debate many years ago with the president of the American Atheists. At the time, his name was David Silverman. Ethnically, he was Jewish, but he was an atheist. And during the debate, I kept saying to him, hey, David, if you're an atheist, you can't justify why the Holocaust was wrong. And he tried to avoid that conclusion, but I kept pressing it on him. And he finally said, Frank, you're right. The Holocaust wasn't really wrong. And I said, David, if your worldview is telling you the Holocaust isn't really wrong, you have the wrong worldview. Because you know with more certainty the Holocaust was wrong than you know that atheism's true. So why would you ever say that atheism is true? It's not true. If the Holocaust is wrong, God exists. Otherwise, everything's just a matter of opinion. If there is no God, then there are no human rights. Have you noticed that in our country, we seem to be inventing rights every 10 minutes? Yet many of the people suggesting they have certain rights or demanding they have certain rights are atheists. You know, if there is no God, there are no rights. There's not only no right to same-sex marriage, there's no right to natural marriage. There's not only no right to abortion, there's no right to life. There's not only no trans rights, there's no Christian rights. There's no rights of any kind if there's no God. It's just your opinion against somebody else's. And our founding document recognizes this. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men were created and endowed by their government. No, it doesn't say that. Endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. And governments are instituted among men to secure rights. The government doesn't give you your rights or take them away, supposedly. A good government's supposed to secure the rights you already have. If a government gives you rights, then the next government can take it away. It's not really a right then, is it? It's a preference. Rights are something you have even if nobody else recognizes them. And that comes from God. If there is no God, murder, slavery, and racism are not wrong, but we all know they are. If there is no God, Christians have never done anything wrong. By the way, if you're a Christian, what is one of the biggest objections non-Christians say about you? You're a hypocrite. Now, when somebody calls you a hypocrite, here's what I think you ought to say. You're right. So, what does that prove? That I don't live up to my own standards? Do you live up to your own standards? Do you realize that everyone's a hypocrite? That nobody lives up to their own standards perfectly. Yeah, I don't live up to the standards. Also, you might say, you know, you've just given evidence for God because you're claiming hypocrisy is wrong. Why is hypocrisy wrong if there is no God? If you're going to claim I've done something wrong, you must be implying there's a standard of right that I need to obey. There is no standard unless God exists. Now, it is true, a lot of people have been hurt by Christians and the church. I get that. But Dr. John Dixon, who now teaches at Wheaton University, asks people who have been hurt by the church this question. Consider this question. When somebody plays Beethoven poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Beethoven, right? You blame the player. So when someone plays Jesus poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Jesus. Look, I know this is a news flash for some. Christianity is not Christians. Christianity is Jesus. So when we don't play Jesus well, that doesn't do anything to tell you whether or not Christianity is true. It's just pointing out that we're fallen. In fact, Christopher Hitchens, whom I debated a couple of times, some of you may remember Christopher Hitchens. He was a brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent. And you can see these debates on our YouTube channel. Hitchens died in 2011, but he wrote a book called God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. And during our debates, he would talk about how religious people have done a lot of evil things. And of course, I agreed. We have done evil things. But I said, Christopher, first of all, you have no standard by which to judge what good or evil is. But secondly, you're kind of proving our worldview. We agree we're depraved. We agree we're evil. That's why we need a Savior. And I said to him, I'm a hypocrite, Christopher. I can't live up to what Jesus told me to live up to. But if I could, I wouldn't need him. If I was perfect, I wouldn't need a Savior. And so when people say, look, I can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal. We got room for one more. You see, the church is a hospital for sinners. It's not a country club for saints. To say I can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there would be like saying I can't go to the gym because there's too many out-of-shape people down there. Well, that's why they're there. They're trying to improve themselves. And one reason you come to church is to do that. And by the way, religion doesn't poison everything. Everything poisons religion. I poison religion. I don't live up to the pure words of Christ. But again, if I could, I wouldn't need him. Also, if there is no God, tolerance is never good. If there's one absolute from people on the left, it's tolerance. Now, are Christians commanded to be tolerant? Be careful. What are Christians commanded to be? Loving. You see, tolerance is too weak. Tolerance says hold your nose and put up with them. Love says reach out and help them. And if we're going to love people, which means seeking what's best for them, we can't tolerate everything they want to do. That wouldn't be loving. I mean, our culture thinks that love means approval. Love does not mean approval. And every parent knows this. In fact, how many parents do we have in here? All right, how many former children do we have in here? Okay, good. That's all of us then. Question, if your parents approved of everything you wanted to do when you were 13, would they have been loving parents? No, they'd have been enabling you to do evil if they approved of everything you wanted to do. If you want to love somebody, if you want to seek what's best for the other person, you have to stand in the way of the evil they want to do. You're not loving when you go, oh yeah, I'm with you. And so many people, particularly on the sexual issues, want to go, oh yeah, I'm with you. You're not loving them. You're actually being heartless because you're allowing them to go down a self-destructive road and you're cheering them on. You know, Jesus gave us one new command. What's the one new command? Love one another as I have loved you. How did he love us? He sacrificed himself for us, like Michael Monsoor sacrificed himself for his friends. So how are we supposed to love people? We're supposed to sacrifice ourselves for them. And you know what we do when we tell them what they want to hear rather than what they need to hear? We don't sacrifice ourselves for them. We're sacrificing them for ourselves. The reason we tell people what they want to hear is so they don't get mad at us. So we're really saying that for ourselves. But if we're willing to withstand their wrath because we love them, then we're going to sacrifice ourselves for their benefit. In fact, Thomas Sowell, who says everything well, he's now almost 94 years old, said this. When you want to help people, you tell them the truth. When you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. If you want to tell people what they want to hear, you're not loving. You're an enabler. And Jesus wasn't nice all the time, as we talked about this morning. Jesus loved people and was strong enough to tell them when they were going in the wrong direction, and we need to do the same thing. Finally, if there is no God, you can't complain about injustice or evil. Why? Because injustice and evil don't exist unless God exists. You say, well, how can that be? Well, C.S. Lewis, early on in his life, was an atheist. He went through World War I. He saw his best friend die, and he came home saying there can't be a good God. There's too much injustice in the world. Then later on, after talking to Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings, as you know, Lewis realized his argument didn't work. And he ultimately put it in the book Mere Christianity. He pointed out that evil requires good and good requires God. Here's how he put it. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, you wouldn't know what a crooked line was unless you knew what a straight line was. You wouldn't know what injustice was unless you knew what justice was. Something can't be not right unless something is right. And you say, well, why can't evil just exist on its own? Because evil is a lack in a good thing. It's a privation. It's a parasite. Evil is like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a good body, you got a better body. What happens if you take all the body out of the cancer? You got nothing. Cancer needs a body to be in. Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of a car, you got a better car. What happens if you take all the car out of the rust? You got a Pinto, all right? It doesn't exist on its own. Or we could say it this way: the shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you have to have sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil, but you can't have shadows without sunshine. You can't have evil without good. So if evil exists, good exists, which means God exists. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but evil doesn't disprove God. Evil may prove there's a devil out there, but it doesn't disprove God, because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed. Are you with me? Now, there's a lot more in the books, and you can ask, during the Q&A, well, why does God allow this certain evil? That's another question, but you can't say that evil disproves God. It actually shows God does exist. So what can we conclude from these three arguments? From the cosmological argument, we can see that the first cause is spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, and intelligent. From the design argument, we get more information that he's intelligent. We also see that he's sustaining the universe. From the moral argument, we can see that this being is also the standard of righteousness, the standard of morality. So from these three arguments, we get a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things and is moral. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the God of biblical Christianity, identified without reference to the Bible. We haven't even opened the Bible yet, and it looks like we have the God of the Bible. This is called natural revelation or natural theology. You don't need the Bible to know that God exists. We're just reasoning from effect to cause. In fact, if someone were to ask you, how do you know that God exists? I think you ought to say, I know God by his effects. If there's a creation, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause, a creator. If there's design in the universe and design in you, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause, a designer. If there's a moral law written on the heart, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause, a moral lawgiver. If there's evidence that a man predicted and accomplished his own resurrection from the dead, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause. Who could do that? Only a being like God. Even if you think you've had some sort of personal experience with God, whether it's answered prayer or you think God has somehow communicated with you, you're doing the same thing. You're taking that experience and effect, and you're reasoning back to the cause of that experience, God. You're always reasoning from effect back to cause, and that's what scientists do. They try and figure out what particular cause caused a particular effect. There has to be an ultimate first cause that isn't an effect himself. His essence equals his existence. Amen. From my philosophy professor, the great Richard G. Howe. Now, some of you may be going, wait a minute. Don't atheists have good arguments against this? No, they don't. In fact, atheists have made reason itself impossible by their ideology of materialism. What do I mean by that? Most atheists today don't believe in an immaterial realm at all. They don't think you have a mind, just a brain. You don't have a soul, you just have a body. You don't have free will, you're just a molecular machine. Everything you do is the result of the laws of physics. You're nothing more than a moist robot. Now, C.S. Lewis answered this very powerfully 70 years ago. I can't say it any better than him, so I'm just going to show you the quote. It's a 2-slide quote that Lewis said on one of his broadcast talks on the BBC during World War II. Here's how Lewis put it. He said, suppose there were no intelligence behind the universe. In that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. Thought is merely the byproduct of some atoms within my skull. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism, and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I can't believe in thought, so I can never use thought to disbelieve in God. Boom. As John Madden would say. You can't say it any better than that. Atheists have made reason itself impossible, so any kind of reason they try and bring against God doesn't work, because they're stealing reason from the theistic worldview to try and say God doesn't exist. That's a book I wrote called Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. So God does exist, it appears. The next question is, which God? How do we know it's the God of the Bible and not some other God? Well, for that, we got to move on to miracles, because miracles can be used by God to confirm who speaks for him. Here's just one problem with miracles. A lot of people think miracles are impossible. Like, for example, Noah and the ark. Hey, is this being recorded? Can we just keep this quiet between ourselves? Can we all admit as Christians that Noah and the ark is crazy? Thank you. And a resurrection. We have to believe in a resurrection. I already asked you guys earlier, has anyone seen one? No one has. So why would you believe in this resurrection? And for some reason, the big problem miracle in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tale or a tale of a whale? What can you really believe in Jonah? Now, ladies and gentlemen, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? Yeah, the greatest miracle in the Bible is not the resurrection. The greatest miracle in the Bible is, I got some of you a second time. Yes. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. Now, here's the interesting part. Atheists are admitting the evidence for the first verse. As I mentioned before, they don't think it's God, but what else could it be? Space, matter, and time had a beginning. The odds-on favorite, a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent creator created this universe. So if Genesis 1:1 is true, is it possible these other verses are true? Of course Noah's crazy, unless God exists. Of course resurrections don't happen unless God exists. Of course Jonah's a fairy tale unless God exists. Now, a lot of people will say, well, I can't believe in miracles because I've never seen one. First of all, you're living in a miracle, the universe. But secondly, you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. You believe in your mind. Have you ever seen it? You're using it right now. You believe in the laws of logic, the laws of mathematics. Have you ever seen those? No, you're using them right now. You believe in justice. Have you ever seen justice? Oh, you may have seen people treated justly or unjustly, but you've never seen justice in itself because it's not something you see. It's an immaterial reality grounded in the nature of God. It's a virtue. You've never seen love, and everybody believes in love. In fact, in the second debate we had with Christopher Hitchens, again, these are on our YouTube channel, the Cross-Examine YouTube channel, a student at the College of New Jersey asked Hitchens this question. He said, Christopher, what is love? And Hitchens, being a materialist, had to come up with a materialistic answer. So after he hemmed and hawed for a while, he finally said, love is a chemical. And I said, don't tell that to your wife. Honey, do you love me? Yeah. Why? Because I got the chemical today. Tomorrow I might not have it. No, love is not a chemical. Love is a decision to seek what's best for the other person. And yet that's what Hitchens had to say because he's a materialist. We all believe in love even though we've never seen it in itself. You've never seen gravity. Oh, Frank, there it is right there. Nope, you're not seeing gravity. What are you seeing? You're seeing the effects of gravity. We really don't even know what gravity is. You've never seen George Washington. You've never seen the guy whose name this town is named after, right over here, Carrollton. You've never seen the guy. Why do you believe in him? Because he's left effects behind that are best explained by him. His name's on the Declaration of Independence. You know he existed, even though you've never seen him. Now, do you realize that Christianity is still true, even if there have been no miracles since Jesus and the apostles? Modern day miracles aren't necessary for Christianity. If miracles occurred in the first century, Christianity's true. But for atheism to be true, every single spiritual experience and miracle claim in the history of the world has to be mistaken. Is that possible? Yeah, it's possible. Is it reasonable to believe? No, I don't think so. And if miracles do occur even today, you ought not expect to see many of them. Why? Because miracles by definition have to be rare events. If they happened all the time, they wouldn't get our attention. I mean, if everybody could do miracles, how are we supposed to know who to follow? I mean, imagine if say, resurrections occurred all the time, and you went to somebody and you went, hey, Jesus predicted and accomplished his own resurrection from the dead so you could be saved. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle Leroy just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back, right? No, if miracles occurred all the time, they wouldn't get our attention. They have to be rare events. And so you ought not expect to see a lot of miracles, if any. If they were regular, they wouldn't be miracles. Although there are things that happen every single day that are so fantastic, and sometimes we are so dull to them, but we know there's got to be a mind behind them. Like, how many people in here, every mother should raise your hand, but maybe the fathers, how many people in here have seen your own flesh and blood born? Now, when you see your own flesh and blood come out of either you or your wife, you don't go, evolution, right? You go, this is amazing. We made whoopee 9 months ago, and now look at this. How did this happen? You know there's intelligence behind this. It's not some random event, but it happens every day. Again, God never did a miracle to convince an atheist because his ordinary works provide sufficient evidence. However, he did seem to confirm certain people. In fact, in the Bible, there are 3 periods where people were confirmed through miracles: Moses, Elijah and Elijah, and Jesus and the apostles. Why? Because they have new revelation that needs new confirmation. That's why you should listen to Moses, Elijah and Elijah, and Jesus and the apostles. God's doing miracles through them to authenticate that they really are people you ought to listen to. So we know that truth exists, that God exists, that miracles are possible. In fact, the greatest miracle of all has already occurred, and even atheists are admitting it. The next question is it true that the crowning miracle in the New Testament occurred, and that is the resurrection of Jesus? Now, in the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, we have a chapter called The Top 10 Reasons We Know the New Testament Writers Told the Truth. We don't have time for 10. We're just going to look at 2 of them. All right, 2 reasons we know the New Testament writers told the truth. And one of them is something called embarrassing stories. What are embarrassing stories? Well, historians know that if they find something embarrassing to the author or authors in the text, it's probably true. Why? Because you're not going to invent things that embarrass you. You're not going to invent things that make you look bad. You might invent things that make you look good, but you won't say lie to make yourself look bad. In fact, let me ask you guys a question in here. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? Look, if you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good. And it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad? No, you don't lie to make yourself look bad. You might lie to make yourself look good, but you won't lie to embarrass yourself. Well, the New Testament writers, this is true of the Old Testament as well, but we're just looking at the New Testament. The New Testament writers have filled the New Testament with embarrassing stories and details they never would have invented if they were making this up. That's why we call this the duh factor. They're not making it up. In fact, let me just give you a few of these. Peter, the leader of the disciples, is called Satan by Jesus. Do you think Mark, who wrote this down at one point, said to Peter, hey, Pete, I'm going to make this a real interesting story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. Look, I'm the leader here. This doesn't look good. And then Peter says, Lord, I'll never deny you. What does he wind up doing? He denies him 3 times. And then at the crucifixion, all the disciples, maybe with the exception of one, they all run away for fear of the Jews. They're cowards. I mean, this is like a Monty Python movie. Run away. They all run away. And who are the brave ones? The women. The women are the brave ones. Now, who wrote the New Testament documents down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews while the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man in here invent that? I mean, if I was inventing this story, I'd make myself look good, wouldn't you? I'd say, look, we marched right down there and we overpowered that elite Roman guard. Yeah, that sounds good. What do you think? John said, get out. Peter roundhouse kicked him. Thomas said, we'll be back. No doubt. Some of you will get that tomorrow. And then we marched right down there on Sunday morning, and we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say it was Mr. Sissy Pants why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb. And oh, by the way, why would you never say the first witnesses were women? I know it was embarrassing to men, but independent of that, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses if you're making this up? Yes, because a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. So if you're making up the New Testament story, you'd only have the men be the first witnesses. Yet all four Gospels say the women were the first witnesses. And one of them was a formerly demon-possessed woman. Gee, what a credible witness you got there, huh? They're not making this up. I actually had a woman come up to me once and she said, Frank, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. I said, why? And she said, because he wanted to get the story out. I said, that is an excellent point. I had not thought of that. Because ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant. He's not going to tell you. You'll see it on the news before you hear it from him. You'll be watching the news going, hey, hon, what? Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you. Yeah, the nuke blew up. I've been hot for 3 days. What's for dinner? In fact, I was just at the University of Cincinnati in November, and some guy came up to me after this, and he actually told me this story. He said he knows of a friend of his that was on a private plane, just he and the pilot died, and he didn't know how to fly the plane. And so just like in the movies, the tower got a hold of him and talked him down. When he went home that night, his wife said, honey, how was your day? And he said, same old, same old. I can't even believe this next verse is in the Bible. I think Pastor Kevin had talked about this recently. This is Matthew 28:17. You remember when Jesus brings his disciples up on the hill in Galilee? He's going to give them the Great Commission where he says, go, therefore, make disciples of all nations. Notice he doesn't say make believers. He says, make disciples. There's a difference. Anyway, it says there right in verse 17, as they're there witnessing the resurrected Jesus, it says, some believed, but some doubted. What? He's standing resurrected right in front of them. And they're going, you see that guy over there? Yeah, that guy over there is Jesus. Oh, no, it can't be. He was just killed not long ago. No, I'm telling you, it's him. Jesus is dead. It can't be him. I'm telling you, it's Jesus. You know that the Romans did to him? They whipped him. They nailed him to a cross. They put a spear in his side. Blood and water came out. If they didn't kill him, the guards themselves could have been killed. I'm telling you, Jesus is dead. It's him. It can't be. It is. How do you know? The women told me. They're not making this up. There's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus. In Mark chapter 3, it says that Jesus' own family thought he was out of his mind and they wanted to take him home. Now, Mark is almost universally recognized to be the earliest gospel. And you've probably heard people say, oh yeah, the New Testament writers embellished Jesus to be God. Really? Then why is Mark chapter 3 in there? It's embarrassing. His own brothers don't believe in him. In fact, we learn later, however, that James, the half-brother of Jesus, dies as a martyr for his brother in 62 AD in the city of Jerusalem. And the New Testament doesn't even tell us this. The Jewish historian Josephus tells us this. Why is James dying as a martyr 30 years after the resurrection, the alleged resurrection, if while Jesus was on earth prior to the resurrection, he didn't believe his brother was God? Well, Paul actually says in an ancient creed that's recorded in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3-8, the earliest evidence for the resurrection anywhere in the Bible, that Jesus appeared to James. That must have convinced him his brother was God. Prior to the resurrection, James said to his brother, yo, bro, you ain't God. After the resurrection, he said, yo, bro, you're God. Now, how many people in here have a brother? All right, how many people have a brother who thinks he's God? Yeah. You don't believe in him either. Neither did James. Jesus is called a drunkard. He's called a madman. He's called demon-possessed. You think they invented that? He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And oh, by the way, notice there are 2 prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline. Who are they? Rahab and Tamar. Now, do you think that Matthew, when he was writing the genealogy, said to himself, you know what, I really think I ought to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let me put a couple of prostitutes in. No. In fact, there's a lot of shady people in the bloodline. Judah, from where we get the term Jew from, not a good guy. Jesus from the tribe of Judah. Who is Judah? He's the guy that sold his brother Joseph into slavery in Egypt. And then he's the guy that slept with his daughter-in-law Tamar, who was playing a prostitute. And this guy's in the bloodline of the Messiah. David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess there's hope for the rest of us then. Bathsheba's in there. In fact, when Matthew gets to her in the genealogy, he won't mention her name. What does he say instead? Uriah's wife. Ooh. He's telling the truth, but it's a slam. Who's Uriah? Husband of Bathsheba, whom David had killed so he could cover the crime up. He's telling the truth, but it's a slam. You don't find this kind of thing in ancient biographies outside of Israel. Do you think the Pharaoh would ever allow his historian to say, yeah, Pharaoh, you're the product of prostitutes. You're the product of all these evil people? Never. They're always whitewashed. The Jews' history isn't whitewashed. They tell you the whole truth, and they're not inventing it. And then, by the way, Jesus is hung on a tree. Anyone who's hung on a tree, according to Deuteronomy 21:23, is under God's curse. If you're making a Messiah to the Jews, you don't hang him on a tree. But Jesus was. In fact, think about the scope of the Bible here for a second. What are the 2 trees you find in Genesis? Tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now, fast forward all the way to Revelation. The Bible is very symmetrical. What tree do you find in Revelation? The tree of life, right? You know there's a tree in the middle? It's the tree upon which they hung Jesus. Because we sinned at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The only way we're going to have access to the tree of life is if Jesus is hung on the tree in our place. But if you were making this up, you'd never say that. So this is not an invented story. It's too embarrassing. In fact, Dennis Prager, some of you may know who Dennis Prager is. He's a conservative Jewish radio host and author. He says, one reason I know that the Old Testament is correct is because no people would ever write such an unflattering history of themselves. I agree, but I'd also say to Dennis, hey, if embarrassing testimony is evidence for the Old Testament, why isn't it evidence for the New as well? Now, there's more evidence in the book, but we got to move on to our final point, and that is excruciating deaths. And this is the argument that says that these people who were in a position to know whether Jesus had resurrected or not died excruciating deaths when they could have saved themselves by saying it never happened. Now, it's very important to realize that all the writers of the New Testament, with the exception of Luke, Luke's the only Gentile, all the writers of the New Testament are Old Testament believers in Yahweh. They think they're God's chosen people. The question is, why would they leave their long-held religious beliefs to believe something that they didn't think could happen? Number one, they didn't think a man could claim to be God. That would be blasphemy. Number two, they didn't think one guy would rise from the dead in the middle of the time. They knew we'd all rise at the end of time, but they didn't think one guy would in the middle of time. Why would they say this really happened if it didn't? In fact, and then go to their deaths for it, or at least be persecuted for it. In fact, what we need to do is look at the apostles' beliefs and practices before and after the resurrection. Before the resurrection, they believed in animal sacrifice. They've been slaying lambs to Yahweh for hundreds of years. Then suddenly Jesus comes along and they go, we don't need to slay these lambs anymore because these lambs are just symbols of the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Here he is. Before they believed in a binding law of Moses. Afterwards, Christ's life fulfilled the binding law of Moses. Before they believed in strict monotheism. Afterwards, they're believing in a Trinity. Yes, the Trinity is hinted at in the Old Testament, but it's much clearer in the New. Before they believed in the Sabbath, in fact, they thought they could be stoned for not obeying the Sabbath. Afterwards, they're worshiping on Sunday, and Paul says, you don't have to obey any Sabbath or festival day anymore. Why don't you have to obey the Sabbath anymore? Because the Sabbath has arrived. Jesus is our rest. Before they believed in a conquering Messiah, afterwards a sacrificial Messiah. Yes, Jesus will conquer when he comes again. Before they believed in circumcision, afterwards they believed in baptism and communion. Let me point out one other thing, ladies and gentlemen. Does anybody think anybody would invent a religion with circumcision as their entry fee? Who would make this up? Wait a minute, you want me to do what to join your club? This is not invented. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what would have caused these pious Jews to abandon everything on the left and adopt everything on the right virtually overnight? The only thing I can think of is what psychologists call an impact event. What's an impact event? An impact event is an event that occurs in your life that is so impactful, so dramatic, that it can change your perspective 180 degrees. Some impact events are so dramatic that although you might not remember what you had for breakfast this morning, you'll remember an impact event that happened 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago if you're old enough. In fact, there's probably only a few of you that can answer this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you can remember where you were and what you were doing November 22nd, 1963, raise your hand and hold it up high. Ladies and gentlemen, you see these people with their hands up? These people are very old. All right. November 22nd, 1963 is my earliest memory. I was 2 years old in 2 days. Yes, I'm 62 years old. I know, I don't look a day over 61. In fact, when I turned 50, my wife was very encouraging. She said, honey, you're gonna live to be 100. I said, how do you know? She said, because you look half dead already. All right. Anyway, I'm 2 years old in 2 days. I'm standing in the living room in our home in Wanamassett, New Jersey, and my mother is sitting on an ottoman in front of a black and white TV, weeping uncontrollably. Mommy, what's the matter? What's the matter? They killed the president. They killed the president. President Kennedy assassinated that day. I can still see my mother in my mind right now when she was 26 years old. Why? Because I never saw her cry like that. That was an impact event. She's 86 now, but I can see her when she was 26. That's my earliest memory. I don't remember anything before that and very little after that. Where were you when the second plane hit the tower? I was in my home office in our house near Charlotte, North Carolina. I had the TV on behind me. I had seen the first tower had been hit, but I didn't know by what. And I was talking to a pastor on the north side of Charlotte because we were talking about me coming to speak at his church, and we were talking about the topic. And I said, hey, do you have the TV on? And he goes, yeah. And we're just talking, and suddenly he screams into the phone. He goes, the second tower just got hit. I turned around, look at the TV, the second tower's on fire. I said, was it a Cessna? He goes, no, it was a big plane. It was like a United plane. I said, you saw that? He said, it flew right in there on live TV. I said, look, let me call you back. I hung up the phone. For some reason that day I had CNN on, the communist news network. And I'm not making this up, but the commentator on CNN said, one has to think there's some sort of navigational error here. I said, navigational error? You doofus. This is the clearest day in the history of the Big Apple. What do you think, pilots can't see where they're going? I mean, you think Stevie Wonder's flying these planes? I mean, come on. This is terrorism. I called that pastor the next day. I said, we're going to come to your church and talk about Islam because that's what this is related to. Now, 9/11 was over 22 years ago. And those of you who are old enough in here can remember something about that day. But if I were to ask you where you were 22 days ago, most of you are going to go, I don't know, let me look at my iPhone. What was I doing that day? I don't know. Why can you remember something from 22 years ago but not 22 days ago? No impact event 22 days ago, impact event 22 years ago. Do you think if Jesus really did rise from the dead, that would have been an impact event? Do you think they would have remembered that? Do you think they would have had any trouble remembering what he said and did, especially over the next 40 days? No, that would have been easy to remember. In fact, they couldn't forget it. And that's the only way I could figure out why they would have abandoned everything on the left and adopted everything on the right on the threat of persecution and death. I mean, think about it this way. What did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? What did they get by saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? Well, they got kicked out of the synagogue, then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks. We're going to start a new religion. We are? Yeah, what's it going to get us? First, we get kicked out of the synagogue, then we get beaten, tortured, and killed. Well, sign me up. What a great idea. Why haven't we thought of this before? In fact, they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. I get the question, maybe you get the question if you're a Christian. Are there any non-Christian writers that talk about Jesus and the apostles? Yes, they're all in chapter 9 of I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. But I think there's often an illicit assumption under that question. People want other sources because, you really can't trust these people because these people were biased. You can only trust the non-Christian sources to know what happened in the first century. If you think about that for more than 10 seconds, you realize how stupid that is. What did these people have to gain by saying it was true? Nothing. They had everything to lose by saying it was true. They had no motive to invent this. And yet they went to their death saying it happened. Who are you going to trust? In fact, some of you may know my friend J. Warner Wallace, the cold case homicide detective, who's been on Dateline more than any other homicide detective because he solves murders that are decades old. Jim's also a Christian, and he uses his homicide skills to investigate the greatest homicide of all time, the homicide of Jesus. And he wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity, several other books. His website's very good, coldcasechristianity.com. And Jim says that whenever he finds a body that has been murdered, he says, I don't need to track down 1,000 motivations for why that guy may have been murdered. He says, it's only one or more of these 3 motivations as to why that guy was murdered. There was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. Sex, money, or power. Those are the 3 things that can drive people to murder. In fact, they're the same 3 things that can drive any of us to sin. Why? Because sex, money, and power are good things. In fact, they're so good, we'll often take shortcuts to get them. That's what sin is. So Jim says, if you're going to say the New Testament writers have invented this whole story, you got to find one or more of those 3 motivators. So let's take a look. Ladies and gentlemen, did the New Testament writers, the apostles, suddenly get real popular with the ladies for saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? No, they didn't get sex. Did they get money? No, they weren't 21st century prosperity gospel preachers. Did they get power? No, they got the opposite of power. They got persecuted. Paul had power when he was persecuting the church. As soon as he becomes a Christian, he's the one persecuted. They didn't get sex. They didn't get money. They didn't get power. There's no motive to make this up. They had every motive to say it didn't happen. And then why would they then go die for a known lie? And at this point you may go, wait a minute, Frank, are you going to tell me that martyrdom somehow proves Christianity? Because if you're going to say that, don't you have to say that martyrdom proves Islam? And the answer is no. Why? Because there's a lot of differences between the Muslim martyrs of today and the New Testament martyrs of New Testament times. So let me just give you one difference for our purposes here. The New Testament, the Muslim martyrs haven't witnessed anything that tells them that Islam is true. They just have faith. The New Testament martyrs, on the other hand, witnessed the risen Jesus. They saw Jesus. They touched Jesus. They ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. Yes, some people will die for a lie they think is the truth. Nobody will die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament writers were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. Now, last thing I'm going to say about this is going to sound like heresy for a minute, for those of you that believe the Bible's inerrant like I do, but it's not. Stick with me. Christianity is not true because a series of documents we put under one binding we call the Bible says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. You say, well, how can that be? Ladies and gentlemen, do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written? Why? Because they didn't read about this in a book. They witnessed the resurrected Jesus. In other words, Christianity did not begin with a book. Christianity began with an event, the resurrection. There would be no books written in the first century by Jews claiming a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead, and then these people go and willingly die for it, unless a man really did claim to be God and really did rise from the dead. In fact, we could put it this way. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. You wouldn't have these documents unless the resurrection occurred. Jesus would have been just another itinerant, Messiah-like preacher who faded into the annals of history. And there were at least 20 of these in Jewish history. You don't hear about them because they didn't rise from the dead. Jesus did. So there's more evidence, but we don't have time to get into it from the New Testament. Let's just look at the overall picture. Does truth exist? The answer is, if somebody says there's no truth, you're going to say, is that true? Does God exist? First argument, cosmological argument. Second argument, teleological argument. Third argument, moral argument. From those three arguments, we get a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created and sustains all things. Are miracles possible? What's the greatest miracle in the Bible? Yeah, Genesis 1:1. If Genesis 1:1 is true, every other verse is at least possible. Did Jesus rise from the dead? Sure seems to be. We've only looked at 2 out of at least 10 lines of evidence that suggests he did. And if Jesus rose from the dead, then you can show the entire Bible is the Word of God, which is what we do in the book. So if you want to go further, the book is available. There's that QR code again. If you were here this morning and keyed on the QR code, you don't need to do it again. It's going to take you to the same place. But if you want this entire presentation in a PDF format and about 10 other presentations, just follow the link on that QR code. Also, we have the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. We have Correct, Not Politically Correct. That's the book I mentioned this morning that deals with same-sex marriage and transgenderism without quoting Bible verses. And then Hollywood Heroes, Your Favorite Movies Reveal God, co-authored by the great Zach Turek right here. And we go through the top movie franchises of the past 50 years and point out they all have stolen from the greatest story ever told. By the way, there's a lot of apologetics and a lot of life lessons in that book too, put in kind of a fun manner. Then we're teaching online courses now. If you go to crossexamine.org, there are many folks that teach online courses with us. I teach courses, Alicia Childers, Steve Meyer, Gary Habermas, many other people you might know. If you want to take a course, you can. Sean McDowell. We're on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. In fact, we've combined these three into one social media platform. We call it UTwitface. Have you guys signed up for UTwitface yet? It's kind of a Jersey thing. We're also on Instagram and TikTok, by the way. Don't forget, we have the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast twice a week. Wherever you get podcasts, you can find it. I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. We're on TV every Wednesday nights. And if you don't do anything else, at least download the free Cross-Examined app. 2 words in the App Store, Cross-Examined. And it not only has the TV show streaming, it's got the podcast on there. It even has a quick answer section. So you might be having lunch with somebody, and they say something that's wrong about Christianity, and you're not quite sure how to answer it. All you need to do is take out your phone and go, hey, hang on, I'm getting a text. Hey, what about this? All right, check it out. It's free. By the way, if that QR code didn't work, then just text the word evidence to 855-909-0582. 855-909-0582. Evidence, no punctuation, just the word evidence to 855-909-0582. Because some of you this morning said the QR code didn't work, okay? So you can get to the same place by doing that. All right, final thing before we go to questions. It's true. So what? So what if it's true? Well, the best evidence of all is that someone actually did die for you. Now, when I was in the Navy, I was in naval aviation, and we had to earn golden wings, which were fairly hard to earn, but there's nothing more difficult in the Navy to earn than a golden trident. That's what the SEALs wear. Very few people that start SEAL training make it through. Maybe 5%. Those that do make it through wear that trident with pride. It is their identity. When Michael Monsoor was buried in Rosecrans Cemetery in San Diego, California, just about every Navy SEAL on the West Coast showed up for his funeral. And when they passed his casket, they took off their tridents and pressed them into his casket. They took their identity and put their identity in the one that sacrificed himself for them, the one that died for them. That's what we're supposed to do. But our culture says, oh no, don't put your identity in your savior, put your identity in your political party, or put your identity in your sexual preference, or put your identity in your ethnic group, or put your identity in your vocation. Ladies and gentlemen, you know how fragile those identities are? Say you put your identity in your sexual preference. What happens when you're no longer sexually preferred? Or you can no longer sexually perform. You no longer have an identity? Or if you put your identity in your job, what happens when you lose your job? You no longer have an identity? Even if you put your identity in another person, what happens when, God forbid, that person dies or leaves you? You no longer have an identity? No, your identity is not in these temporal, fragile things that may be important to a certain extent, but they're not ultimate. No, you are meant to put your identity in your Savior, who not only died, but also rose from the dead. I mean, think about this, ladies and gentlemen. That everyone you love will die, everything you build will crumble, everything you say will be forgotten, everything you do will come to nothing. You and your identity will die and vanish unless the resurrection's true. If the resurrection's not true, everything's temporary. I can tell you Islam's not true. Hinduism isn't true. Buddhism isn't true. Judaism's incomplete. Nothing matters at all unless the resurrection's true. And do you realize everyone's going to be resurrected? The only question is to where? So, the resurrection's true. The evidence that is there. The question I'll ask you if you're not a Christian is, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? If not, why not? Only you know that. Why wouldn't you become a Christian? Yeah, it may be difficult in this life, but the retirement plan is out of this world, ladies and gentlemen. All right. All right, with that said, we're going to go to questions. And since no one likes to ask the first question, we're going to move right on to the second question. And it's going to be down here because Whit has a microphone. So if you want to ask a question, just line up behind this microphone. And we'll start.
Your second question.
Your second question, sir. Yes, what's your name, by the way?
Blake Kitchens.
Blake, go ahead, sir.
It's not so much a details question about your arguments and things like that. I'm pretty familiar with many of them. It's more of because so this is like my young adults group here. It's more because you interact with so many young adults and Gen Z. How are you seeing ministries take the resources that you have and kind of this shift that we're starting to see where Gen Z is like not really buying the fluff anymore? At least that's in my experience. How are you seeing other ministries and churches take these things and reach more than just 4 or 5% of Gen Z, which is involved in ministries?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we do provide a lot of resources off our homepage for curricula. Curriculum is now big, and we have curriculum for all different ages on this kind of thing. So we see more interest in that. And yeah, the fluff, I don't know why any church wants to do fluff. What's the point of that? We're supposed to be making disciples, as Jesus said. So I think as times get more and more hostile to Christianity, you're going to see the wheat separated from the chaff, and you're going to see people who want to be true disciples and be real serious about it. And so evidence is necessary. You know, 70, 80 years ago, you could open the Bible and people would say, what does the Bible say? Now you open the Bible and people call you names, right? You bigot. How can you believe such a thing, right? So you need evidence, you need apologetics to break down those objections. And I think you got to start asking questions. And one of the questions, as I say, is if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? Right. And if they hesitate or say no, it's not a head problem, it's a heart problem. In fact, if it's okay, I'd like to take a quick survey here, Blake, because this will illustrate the point. I want everybody in this room, if you're a Christian, this is just for the Christians, not the non-Christians. If you're a non-Christian, thank you for being here. But I want everybody in this room, if you're a Christian, to think of somebody you know who's not a Christian whom you'd like to be a Christian. Friend, relative, somebody like that. Everybody got someone? Okay, don't point at them. All right, here's my question. Is the person you're thinking of right now on a relentless pursuit of truth? They want to know if Christianity is true, or are they apathetic or hostile to Christianity? How many people say the person I'm thinking of is on a relentless pursuit of truth? Raise your hand, please. One. How many people say the person I'm thinking of is apathetic or hostile? Yeah, look around the room. The truth is most people are looking for God like a criminal's looking for a cop. They're running from God. Remember, they're on a happiness quest. They're not on a truth quest. That's why you need to stop them, especially when you keep going back and forth and they appear not to be interested at all. You need to stop them and ask them, if this were true, would you become a Christian? If they say no, you can do 5 things right away, okay? There's maybe more, but I'll just give you 5. Pray. You should always pray. Number 2, you can plant seeds every now and then that show them their worldview's false and Christianity's true. Not all the time, but every once in a while, that they may sprout later. Number 3, you can ask questions. Like, what do you mean by that? And how'd you come to that conclusion? This is from Greg Koukl's book, Tactics, to see if they can really defend what they believe. Ask a lot of questions. Number 4, you can love them. When we say love, as we said before, it doesn't mean you approve of everything they do. It means that you're going to seek what's best for them. So tell them the truth. And number 5, you can wait. Why wait? Because why should you expect people to agree with you right now? I mean, sometimes people say, Frank, you go to a lot of college campuses, sometimes the questions are hostile. How come you don't get mad at the kids? Like, why would I get mad at the kid? I'm 62 years old. When I was 22, I didn't agree with my 62-year-old self. Why should I expect a 22-year-old now to agree with me? I don't know what background this person has, where they've come from, experience they've had, what their interests are. I have no idea. So I shouldn't, and you shouldn't expect people to agree with you. It takes time, in other words. What might happen if you stay in their lives, you do those things, and then sometimes people only look up when there's a difficulty, a tragedy, and then that person's gonna call your phone and wanna talk to you because you've been a person of spiritual depth. When the student is ready, he will summon the teacher, but not before. So just do those 5 things and leave the results to God. All right?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, ma'am. Hey, what's your name?
Hello, I'm Cameron Smith.
Hey, Cameron.
I have a couple of friends that I invited here tonight that declined. But they used to go to a kind of like a life group with me, but for high schoolers. And one has a career that made him see the world differently, and has unfortunately, changed his faith. And I tried to help out. I tried to invite them to services like Easter. I invited them, and they declined for that one too. How, you kind of answered this before, but how can I continue to help them with their declines?
Yeah, I think those 5 things I just mentioned, because if you ask them if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian, and they say no.
I actually had a, sorry for
No, I was going to say, just do those 5 things, pray, plant seeds, ask questions, love them, and wait.
I actually had a conversation with him today because today is his birthday. And I told him happy birthday. I invited him here. He declined. And he talks to me and talks about other religions, how people at work talk to him about different religions, Muslims and others. And I'm not quite sure how to go forward with that conversation except for telling him my experiences. How can I go forward with that?
Say the last part, except what?
To tell him my experiences.
Well, you can use experiences, but Mormons can use experiences, and Muslims can use experiences too. We actually have evidence that our worldview is true, unlike they do. So we ought to be using evidence, because anybody could say, well, I had this experience. Okay, but what evidence do you have that, you might know something because you had an experience, but it's hard to show somebody the truth of it. So that's why I think using evidence can be helpful. But you got to start asking those questions and just continue to stay in their lives if you can. Does that make sense?
Oh, I am.
All right.
I'm going to his house after this.
All right.
To celebrate his birthday.
All right, excellent. And by the way, this is live streamed, so if they want to watch it in the privacy of their own home, they can.
All right.
All right.
We'll tell him about it.
All right, thank you, Cameron. Thanks for caring. It's British Dave, ladies and gentlemen.
Hey.
Hey, we just keep him around for the accent. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So a lot of the family and friends, and honestly the majority of people I know on a personal level that are not Christians are living in England still.
Sure.
So naturally, even though I did try, they couldn't make it tonight. With that being the case, I did, it's late over there, so I did try and get them to watch it, but half of them have jobs. So I did solicit some questions from them to try and ask you, and I'm going to try and position myself somewhat from their perspective so that I can, and I did try and ask some follow-ups. So this is my cousin. His name is Daniel.
Okay.
He's a journalist, so I apologize in advance for the long-winded nature of the question.
All right.
But I'm going to read it to you and hopefully...
Well, you can summarize it. Go ahead. What's his main point?
Well, it's not like 600 words or anything like that. But here it goes.
Okay.
So he says, there's an adage that goes, writing about music is like dancing about architecture. It's taken to mean that something fundamental about music, its inexpressible essence, is utterly lost when we try to express it in a way which, by definition, cannot capture its essential truth. In the same way, does reasoning about faith not incur a similarly fatal degradation of what faith truly means?
If he means that we can't completely express God in words, I would, to a certain extent, agree with him that the experience of God is going to be far more spectacular than any words can say. In fact, that's even what the scriptures say in 1 John 3:2. It's called the beatific vision. When we see God for who he is, we will be like him. Okay, so I would agree with him on that. However, while the expression of God may be more than words, it's certainly not less. Okay? So we can say certain truths about God, and we reason to God by analogy, not directly. And this is what Thomas Aquinas talked a lot about, that we're not seeing God or experiencing God directly, we're experiencing him by analogy. Still, we have some idea of what God is like. So I would agree with him that you can go much further than words, but words can also be adequate to have enough information about God to know generally who he is and what he expects of us, and the offer that he provides us, forgiveness, because he has taken our punishment upon himself.
So I did offer, I appreciate that. I did offer a small pushback to him. I said, the pushback I can immediately see would be, what would you say faith means? And he said, the general point is having a go at your rational or rationalist approach / historical claims about the Bible. And he said, as early as the roughly 4th century, St. Augustine was making the point that a literal historical reading of the Bible is the lowest possible way of reading it because it asks absolutely nothing of you in the present. It's all reduced to events that may or may not have happened in the past.
Okay, well, we can disagree with Augustine, and Augustine's not inspired, okay? Augustine did come up with an allegorical type of interpretation in certain areas, but he wouldn't say that the resurrection's allegory. The resurrection literally occurred. So, yeah, you can have people have different approaches to the scripture, but I think the scripture, first of all, the Bible's not a book, it's a library of books. And it's a library of genres too. You are going to find maybe some allegory in there. You're going to find some parable. You're going to find some poetry. You're going to find some prophecies. You're going to find historical writings. You're going to find gospels. You're going to find letters, epistles. I mean, it spans the gambit, and then you need to know what type of genre you're reading in order to interpret it properly. And it's not all literal. In fact, people say, do you take the Bible literally? I say, yeah, where it's meant to be taken literally. But when it says Jesus is the door, I don't think he has a doorknob and hinges. I know that's a metaphor. And this is true in all communication. You've got to discover what genre is being produced so you can interpret it properly. And that's true of all literature. It's certainly true of the Bible. So I don't think everything's meant to be taken allegorically. In fact, any allegory has to refer back to something literal. Everything in the Bible is literally true, but everything in the Bible is not expressed literally. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's expressed in a poetic way or a hyperbolic way. So and this is why even some of the great atheists appreciated the Bible for its just amazing literature, even if they didn't think it was true.
So when he is not interested in a historical framing or an historical argument, with all of the things that we discussed this evening, he's probably not necessarily 100% convinced by those. He's not convinced from a purely faith-driven perspective where he grew up, he went to Catholic school and that didn't do anything for him as well.
Yeah, neither was I. I went to Catholic school too.
Right, so where do you go from there? Is it just those 5 things, or is there something else that
you mean he's not interested in how do you approach him?
Right, because he's not interested in the PowerPoint. He's not interested in what, the traditional faith-driven.
Well, maybe I would ask him if he was outside the tomb in April of 33 AD and he saw Jesus go into the tomb dead and on Sunday come out of that tomb, and then he witnessed him do miracles for 40 days, would he then trust in Jesus?
I'll ask him.
Yeah, because if that really occurred, it's the most fantastic fact in history and the most important fact in history. And while I agree with him that not everything is literal, there certainly is a literal component to the scriptures. And the 2 main points to show that Christianity is true is God exists and Jesus rose from the dead. If those 2 things are true, Christianity follows. I just put truth and miracles in here to deal with a couple of objections that people have. But at the end of the day, it's really, if God exists and Jesus rose from the dead, game over. As C.S. Lewis would say, your countrymen, it's mere Christianity, right? Now, again, I might want to emphasize with him that Christianity isn't Christians. Christianity is Jesus and the revelation he left us. Christians are going to disappoint him, just like atheists are going to disappoint him, right? But that's not the test for truth.
Thank you, Frank. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks so much. Next time, tell your friends to come ask questions themselves, though. Come on. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Good evening. William Bailey.
Hey, William. Go ahead, sir.
By
the way, you get best dressed.
Oh, thank you.
All right.
So earlier today in the service, you were mentioning how there are 2 aspects of faith. There's the belief about something and making sure you have the evidence, but then there's also believe in where you really apply it to your life. So I was curious, in conversations you've had with different people, what have been some of their struggles from going from belief about Christianity to belief in? Yeah. And what were some of the things that you were helpful to just kind of talk to them to really take that leap of faith and trust in Jesus?
Well, there really is no evidence to go from belief that to belief in. If you have enough evidence for belief that, it's just a matter of your own will. Are you going to accept the invitation? And there's no persuading, because the persuasion part is belief that. This is really true. It's up to that person then to decide whether or not they're going to trust in. It's just like you could find somebody who factually would make a great spouse. All the facts line up. But for you to say then, I'm going to ask her to marry me, that's just a step of the will. And it's up to you whether you're going to do that or not. A lot of people have had great people that they could have married and they decided not to. And then the opportunity's gone. So I don't know if there's any way of persuading somebody to go from belief that to belief in. If you have enough belief that, you already know the character of Jesus. So it's going to be just up to that person whether they're going to make that decision or not. If they pray about it, then God obviously wants all to be saved. If they're really open to it, just keep praying, and there'll come a point where if you seek me, you'll find me. They're going to accept. If they don't pray about it, they're not interested. Does this pertain to you or somebody else?
Just like friends that I know.
Okay. All right, good. Well, keep praying for them. Keep giving them evidence, and if they get to the point, well, I know that it's true, it's totally up to them whether they're going to, they might know it's true and not want to give something up. That typically happens, right? Oh, if I gotta become a Christian, I can't do this, this, and this. Well, no. If you become a Christian, you'll not want to do those things anyway, because the Holy Spirit will convict you.
Cool.
Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
All right,
Much
thanks,
appreciated.
William. Appreciate it. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hi, Ernie
Hey,
Reynolds.
Ernie. Oh, yeah. How you doing?
Yeah, enjoyed you this morning too.
Thank you.
I have a wide array of possible responses to this, but I just wanted to get your input on how to respond to someone who has had a sickness for a long time, and you might try to talk with them, and their response is, how can you expect me to believe in that God is real or that God is a loving God when I have prayed to him and I have wanted him to heal my sickness so that I can excel and achieve, but that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So just some help on that.
Yeah, well, the question is this intellectual or more emotional? And I understand, look, there's always two answers to this kind of thing. One is the philosophical answer, which is gonna fall over like a lead balloon if the person really has an emotional issue with it. If the person does have an intellectual curiosity as to why would God allow this to continue, then you can give the philosophical answer.
That's
But
more it, yeah.
I can tell by looking at you, it seems like it's more the pastoral answer that the person needs, which is more comfort than answers. And since I'm from Jersey, I'm not equipped with that, okay? You know what I mean?
I would say their curiosity is more the intellectual side.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, let me give you one insight that might be helpful. Maybe it won't be helpful, but I don't know. It helped me thinking about difficulty. Why do certain things happen? We've already established that evil doesn't disprove God, because nothing would be evil unless there was a standard of good. So it doesn't disprove God, but it is a good question as to why does God allow certain evils, like maybe this one, right? Like, for example, let's use a pretty hard example. Say a baby is sick in the church and everybody prays, heal the baby dies anyway. And people go, why wouldn't God just heal the baby? All these people are praying. Well, if you ask me, why do babies die? I can tell you generally why they die, because we live in a fallen world and things don't always turn out right. But if you ask me, why did that particular baby die? I don't know, but I know why I don't know. I'm inside of time, God is outside of time, and he can see every possible, he can see how everything's gonna turn out, where I can't. And this is the insight that really helped me. It's called the ripple effect. The ripple effect says that every event that occurs ripples forward to affect trillions of other events. I mean, you can think of the ripple effects in your own life. Think about all the ripples that had to happen for you to even be sitting here tonight. Like, for example, your parents had to meet, their parents had to meet, their parents had to meet, right? I mean, we're the products of ripples. Maybe a baby dying today through a series of ripples influences and brings forth a great evangelist who 500 years from now saves millions of people. Can we trace all those ripples? No, we can't, but God can. Also, in this instance, I'm thinking of what Jesus said to I think the man born blind. Was this guy born blind because he did something wrong or his family did something wrong? And Jesus said, no, so the glory of God can show through this person. What kind of witness does this person have? What kind of effects is this person who's going through difficulty having on others? We may know, we may not know. But since we know God exists because evil is real, and we know that there is a resurrection and a redemption coming, we know that God has a reason for it, even if we don't know what that reason is. And so that's why we trust God. And there's no one on earth that can tell you specifically why this illness persists, but we know why no one on earth can, because we're all finite, yet God can see the end from the beginning. And this is why Paul says in 2 Corinthians 4, when he's summing up this section on suffering, He says, for our light and momentary afflictions are achieving for us a greater weight of glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, for what is seen is temporary. We fix our eyes on what is eternal. And so we have to keep our eyes on the eternal. Can we grow through this? Can other people grow through it? Can we somehow become more like Jesus through it? In fact, Dr. Peter Kreeft put it this way. He said, the goal of your life and my life is not happiness. It's not fulfillment. It's not comfort. The goal of all of our lives is training to become more like Jesus. This world is a horrible resort, but it's a great gymnasium. So we go through difficulty, and if we take it right, we become more like Jesus. All right?
Thank you.
Thanks, Ernie. Great question. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Layton.
Layton. Maybe you can help him there. Lake, go ahead. By the way, I'm telling you, this is dangerous. Kids have the best questions that nobody can answer. Go ahead.
Why are so many people saying things are okay when we know they are wrong?
You mean in our country?
Anywhere.
See?
Oops.
Because we're fallen, that's why. Because we often suppress what we know to be true because we want to go in this direction. That's why. People lie to themselves and lie to others to get what they think they want. That's why. We're fallen. Oh, yeah. I know, maybe that's not the answer you wanted.
I don't really care. I was just
all right, good. See? See? He doesn't care either, right? Nobody cares.
An answer.
All right? All right, thank you for your question. Okay, before we go further, it is 8:30, and so if you have a child in the nursery, you need to go get that child. If you don't, your child will be given an espresso and a puppy. Okay? So you can bring them back in if you want. We're just going to go through this question line. But if you have a child in the nursery, we don't want to keep, or the child care, we don't want to keep the workers too long. So, yes, ma'am, go ahead. Hey, how are you?
I'm good.
Hey, what's your name?
Jessica.
Jessica, go ahead.
I am a teacher at a public school, and I have gone through these questions and doubts myself when I was in middle school, and a lot of books on apologetics has helped me. I see a lot of kids in my class. I teach kindergarten through 5th art, so I see them all, and there are so many questions that I'd love to ask them and that we talk about. You know, I feel like I could help them, but it's a public school. And I didn't know if you had any advice on...
What do you teach in the public school?
Art.
Okay. Well, you can use Christian art, right?
I'm trying to, legal ways.
Yeah, I mean, you can use the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel.
No, some of
right?
They're fully clothed? Okay.
Huh?
Are they fully clothed?
Well, even if they're not, I mean,
Adam and Eve.
Yeah, you could use the statue of David, right?
The David? No, he's naked.
Oh no, you got to put a loincloth on him. Okay.
They would. This is elementary. If you show.
You can use Rembrandts, right? There's many Rembrandts of biblical stories. In fact, you can. My friend J. Warner Wallace has a book called. It's called Person of Interest. You could tell the virtually every story in the gospel by art. There's been art done throughout the history. Most art in Western civilization has been art about Jesus and about Christianity, so you can use that. You can also talk about God through the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is not unconstitutional, right? So I think there are ways of bringing that up by talking about cause and effect.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Hey, this art is designed. There must be a designer.
I have snuck some of that in.
Yeah. There you go.
Sometimes I feel like I've had to say, you need to talk to your parents about this because I feel a little...
Well, first of all, if they ask you, you can say whatever you want, all right? And you should.
Okay.
And look, I know it's going to sound a little harsh, but if we continue to hide our faith, then we're not really following Jesus.
And that's my debate. And it's like I see all these kids go through, and I know I could help them, and so I try.
By the way, if you ever get into trouble with any of this, there is an organization that will help you. It's called ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom. ADF, you can find them online. And if say the school tries to fire you or something, and if they think they have a good case, they will defend you free of charge. Okay.
ADF?
ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom. But thank you for wanting to make a difference, Jessica. All right. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Hello, sir.
What's your name?
My name is Austin.
Austin, go ahead.
All right, so my question to you is, for someone that is newer, I guess you could say, you know, I can pray as much as I want, saying, use me however you need me, but how do I go about starting a conversation with somebody? And at what point, I don't want to say, do you stop, but say, like you said, you continue to get denied, or say you're afraid.
You mean a spiritual conversation?
Just, yeah, say if someone is trying to, say you know for a fact that somebody's doing things that are not correct or that don't align with what we're supposed to be doing, saying, talking about, acting.
Okay, here's a question you can ask. Is this a person you know well?
Yeah, well, this is in general, like anybody that I come in contact with.
Okay, well, if it's someone you know well, like somebody in your family is going down the wrong road, I think you could say to them, hey, John, if you thought I was going down the wrong road, would you love me enough to tell me? What's the person going to say? Well, of course. Say, great, can I do that for you right now? Right? Just ask for permission. Ask a lot of questions. Questions are easy to ask and hard to answer. So ask questions. Try and find out where the person's coming from. You know, like, when I meet somebody first time, hey, how are you? What do you do? Where are you from? You know, just trying to learn a little bit about them. See if there's any points of contact that we can just strike up a casual conversation. And then when they ask me what I do, then I can say, no, I kind of have an advantage because I say, well, I wrote a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And if they're interested, then we can talk further. If they go, then I know they're not interested anyway, right? So I think asking questions is the key, and especially in today's culture. And Greg Koukle's book, Tactics, is very good on that.
Just a quick follow. So let's just say they, once again, they buck up or whatever. Say, is that a sign to leave it alone, or?
If what?
Like you said, like if someone's not interested.
Well, if someone's not interested, it's like pushing a rope, right? If you stay in their life, you can do those 5 things I mentioned earlier, but if they're a person on the street you're never going to see again, what are you going to do? Hey, you're not interested in what I have to say, why not? No, they're just not interested, right? You do what you can do, leave the results to God. All right?
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Austin. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name's Josh.
Josh, go ahead.
I kind of have it's a couple little points.
Okay.
Questions. Since we've been talking a lot about, I've noticed in churches, spiritual warfare the last couple of years, which is something I feel like we've neglected a lot in the church for a long time. You know, I have a friend who's not a believer, and we were talking about just, I was trying to explain spiritual discernment and growing in spirit. And I guess this is more of a textbook biblical question, I guess, and maybe it's more of a curiosity question for a lot of Christians, is why, number one, why would God allow Adam and Eve to not have the spiritual discernment or a warning towards Satan before they were deceived in the Garden of Eden? And I think a lot of people in life feel like, well, I'm working in the spirit, or I'm trying to grow in my spirit, but I've been deceived in this way or that. And it wasn't out of not trusting God, but it was out of deception. So I think that's one part of the question.
Well, had God already commanded them not to eat? So he has already told them what not to do, right? So how were they deceived, in the sense that they already were told what to do and what not to do? It says that the serpent deceived them, but they had already been given the instruction, right? So thankfully, God did give them the freedom to make a choice. If he hadn't, then this wouldn't be a moral universe, and then we wouldn't have the capacity to be redeemed either.
Right.
So God gave them the ability to make a choice. Now, they chose not to follow God, and that resulted, of course, in Jesus coming to save us. And now here we are trying to tell everybody about Jesus. So I think it's actually turned out to be a good thing that God gave them a choice. Otherwise, if we just have a non-moral world, there really isn't love either. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, and I think that kind of brings me to the second part of the question I had was, because I noticed I've spoken to a lot of people that are non-believers or they're people who are struggling in their faith, and they're like, well, what strengthened my faith in the last, like, especially the last 4 years, for example, has been the evil in the world that's actually brought me back to my faith.
Yeah.
And I guess my second part is, so how do we explain to non-believers or maybe Christians that are coming back to their faith, like, what is the enemy's